No More Time. From the Kingdom Leadership Series. By Alan Drake. Published by Spirit of Wisdom Publications, Dallas, Texas. Copyright 2014 by Alan Drake.
No More Time.
My grandmother passed away in 2001, just a few days after the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, at the age of 97. I was really close to my grandmother. As we were growing up, my brother and I often stayed with her while my parents worked. She lived through 2 world wars and raised 4 children in rural Texas during the Great Depression. My grandmother was a hard worker all of her life. She left her last job at age 85, but only because the clothing store where she worked finally went out of business. My grandmother had a friendly smile for everyone, even if she was just getting a picture taken for her bus pass. That's how I remember her, almost always in a good mood, with a friendly smile for everyone. She didn't have an easy life, but she had no use for self-pity. She stayed busy, and she was always willing to help anyone in need. As an adult, I used to visit her in the same house where she had kept us while we were growing up. She would sit in her recliner and I would sit on her couch, and we would talk for hours. Her couch now sits under the mantel in my home. On the mantel is an old clock that used to sit on my grandmother's bookshelf. My grandmother prided herself on keeping everything neat, tidy, dust-free, and in its place. The mantel clock was clean, shiny, and in perfect working order when I brought it home from my grandmother's house. I've tried to keep it that way. But in September of 2014, the clock finally stopped working. It ticked its last tock. That clock obviously has sentimental value for me. Seeing it stop working distresses me because of that, but I also believe that sometimes things happen for a reason. I wonder if there might be a deeper meaning to that clock stopping at this particular time. I wonder if God might be sending a message to let us know that we're in a new season now, and that the times that my grandmother knew are over.
The Angel's Declaration.
During John's experience in the book of Revelation, he saw a mighty angel coming down out of heaven, with his face like the sun and legs like columns of fire. The angel set one foot on the sea, and his other foot on the land. His shout was like the roaring of a lion. At one point, the angel raised his right hand to heaven and made this declaration.
Time has run out. Revelation chapter 10 verse 6.
We may have come to one of those junctures in time. It may be that the time has run out. Life as we have known it may be a thing of the past. What has been prophesied by so many for years is finally here. For several years, established prophetic voices have been telling us that rough times are coming. John Paul Jackson and Bob Jones both described these times as a perfect storm of calamities involving economic, political, and religious events, along with wars and catastrophic events in the weather and in nature.
Wake up, little Susie.
On September 14, 2014, I had a dream in which I saw a record label on an old 45 single that read, "Little Susie." I had a sense that this was a theme song. I turned to look at a member of my church who was standing there also. She was crying, or had been crying, and had tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't know her very well in real life, but in the dream I asked her, "I wonder why this is the theme song." Then I immediately turned back to look at the record label, and now I could see the full title. It was "Wake Up Little Susie" by the Everly Brothers. As soon as I saw the full title of the song, I heard the Everly Brothers singing it. My sense was that it was not just a theme song for the dream, but for all of us, and the time in which we are all living. We all must wake up. We are living in a very different time that may become much more intense soon in many areas. We may need to prepare and adjust to new circumstances that change without much warning.
Neville Johnson's announcement.
You may not know the name Neville Johnson. He was a respected church leader in Australia. Paul Keith Davis named Neville Johnson as one of only 3 people who understood the spiritual realm better than anyone he knew. On August 6, 2014, in Lancaster, California, Neville Johnson made a bold announcement. He declared that Yom Kippur that year would mark the cutoff point for us, especially for those of us in America. That date would mark the close of one period in time, and the entering in of some very different times. Yom Kippur that year began on Friday evening, October 3rd. You can watch Neville Johnson deliver that message from the 2014 Lancaster Prophetic Conference, Session 1, on YouTube.
Why is this happening?
The short answer to the question of why is that we, as a society, have forgotten God. We have turned away from Him, forsaken His ways, and walked away from the protection that came with obedience to His commands. As a result, we have left ourselves vulnerable to forces that could be very destructive. Before the children of Israel entered their promised land, Moses took great pains to caution them over and over not to forget the God that brought them there.
Only give heed to yourself, and keep your soul diligently, so that you do not forget the things which your eyes have seen, and they do not depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and your grandsons. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 9. So watch yourselves, that you do not forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which He made with you. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 23. Then watch yourself, that you do not forget the Lord who brought you from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 12. Beware, that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping His commandments and His ordinances and His statutes, which I am commanding you today. Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 11.
Over and over and over, Moses cautioned Israel not to forget God. But at times, Israel did forget the God that created and blessed them. When this happened, Israel went through some difficult times until they cried out to God as a nation and returned to Him again. Almost the entire book of Judges is the story of Israel going through the same cycle. First, forgetting God. Second, experiencing times of great difficulty. Third, seeking God again, crying out to God for deliverance. Fourth, experiencing times of peace and prosperity after turning back to God. And then forgetting God again and repeating the cycle over and over and over for generations.
It's time.
It seems that we are now in one of those difficult times. It's a time that many established, respected leaders in the church have been prophesying for decades. The time is now upon us. So, what should we do? What is the best way to face this time, which may bring many difficulties? Some of the most popular images of our day are the ones that show the British royal crown at the top with the slogan, "Keep calm and carry on," or variations on that theme. That's a good start. Keep calm. The Bible exhorts us many times to fear not. Fear only opens the door to more problems. Since God, who loved us enough to send His Son to die for us, tells us not to be afraid, it must mean that there are better ways to respond to our circumstances. Fear does nothing to help the situation, and if it leads to extreme panic, it can actually prevent us from finding meaningful solutions to difficult situations. So, fear is not an option. Fear will do us no good and could do a lot of harm by keeping us from finding solutions to problems, and it could actually open the door to other problems. We must realize that God has known that this was coming for a long time. It is no surprise to Him. He knows what is coming, and He knows the best ways for us to prepare and to respond to these situations. So our first priority must be to draw close to Him. He's got the answers we need. If we draw near to Him, He promises to draw near to us, James chapter 4 verse 8. Ultimately, safety and provision can only be found in Him.
Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord. Isaiah chapter 31 verse 1. Some trust in chariots, and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. Psalm chapter 20 verse 7. The name of the Lord is a strong fortress, the godly run to Him and are safe. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 10. Be watchful.
This passage of Scripture could well be applied to our situation today.
Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life, and that day will close on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come on all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch, and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. Luke chapter 21 verses 34 to 36.
Jesus admonished his disciples to be always on the watch. But what should we be watching? What should we be on the lookout for? At the same time that Jesus spoke these words to his disciples, he also described certain signs that would indicate that the time was upon them. In our time, there have been many messages from established, respected prophets that have described signs that we should be watching for and be prepared to respond to. Some of these prophets have given detailed descriptions of signs and appropriate responses. The signs they have described have included economic events, political events, religious movements, wars, and events in nature and the weather. This is the time of calamities that Bob Jones and John Paul Jackson called the perfect storm, because so many of these events may be happening at the same time and have the effect of making all of it seem more intense. By watching and praying, we can be prepared for what is coming and hear God's voice to tell us how to respond in the moment.
Believe in the Lord your God, and you shall be established. Believe his prophets, and you shall prosper. 2 Chronicles chapter 20 verse 20.
Here are some of the prophetic voices that have spoken to warn us and to help us prepare. Bob Jones, Bobby Connor, Neville Johnson, John Paul Jackson, Rick Joyner, and Terry Bennett.
Keeping watch.
As different signs or warnings come to my attention, I will plan to share them in future newsletters and articles as God leads, so that we may help each other to be prepared. But our goal during these difficult times is not just to prepare for our own survival. That is the very lowest level of goals. We watch, pray, and prepare in order to best be able to reach out to help others when needs arise in their lives. Together, we will not only survive, we will overcome.
These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. John chapter 16 verse 33.
Thank you for listening to this audiobook. You can find other articles and books by this author at major online retailers. More links to Alan Drake's writings, podcasts, videos, and other media are available on his website at www.spiritofwisdommedia.com.